All right, I am calling the Wednesday, January 25th, 2023 Code Review Task Force meeting to order at 5:30 PM. Welcome to the new year. Glad to see everyone back. The clerk will please take roll.
Donna Jensen.
Here.
Andrew Newsma.
Here.
Nancy Nystuen.
Here.
Joshua Walls.
Here.
Shelley Ward.
Here.
Sarah Albright. Tim Hull. And Steve Roush are absent. Oh,
All right, we have a quorum. Item 1 is the adoption of the agenda. City clerk, does staff have any changes? to
nothing
the
from
agenda?
staff.
Do any task force members have changes? May I have a motion to approve the, adopt the agenda? Moved by
Motion.
Donna, second
Second.
by Shelley. All those in favor, please say aye and raise your hand. Aye. Motion carries. Second order of business is the approval of the minutes from the November 30th meeting. Staff, any changes?
Nothing from staff.
All right, task force members, any changes? May I have a motion to approve? First by Donna, and seconded by Godin. All those in favor, please say aye and raise your hand. Aye. Aye. Motion carries. All right, item 3, review outstanding items. Title 3, Chapter 24, pawnbrokers, secondhand goods, and precious metal dealers. The city staff has an update on this.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we are bringing back in your package you have we've brought back the pawnbroker, secondhand goods, and precious metal dealers chapter to you at the direction of the city council. There was a couple of concerns about the wording that had been changed in there, specifically as it may affect costume jewelry or it may affect other businesses. Since that time, there's also been a small addition to the chapter, which I believe,
It's on page 17,
page 17?
under 324-9.
Is that real 17 out of 92 or 17?
17 out
Yes.
of 92.
Thank
Yeah. And it's A, which would require the employees within 30 days of hire or annually to read in the city code chapter and complete the city's basic knowledge assessment test.
And this is to replace what used to be a city-conducted training.
Okay.
And then also, sorry to interrupt, Michelle, but on page 22 of 92, there is an addition to that the city will conduct audits once per year.
Okay. I was curious about that. I know what an audit is, but what are they auditing, and the fact that there is an audit? I just felt like maybe I was missing the context of, well, what happens if they find that things aren't
That's
right?
why we have the police department here to answer those questions.
Perfect.
I can answer that for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the audit, basically, we would go into Leads Online, the system that we use. It just randomly picks a transaction. We would then meet with the manager, pull that transaction, and just make sure that all of the information is accurate, that they entered the serial number correct, that the description is correct, that the clerk has been trained, gone through the training that we're requesting them to go through once a year and taking that test. It's just to make sure that everything's matching up and that they're complying by the city code of what they need to do when they take in a pawn or buy a pawn.
Okay. And speaking of the training, is there a certain, when they take the knowledge assessment, is the city recording that, or do they need to print it off and keep it in their records and show you?
So the way it's set up right now is it's done through the city's website. They take the test, and then it'll automatically send an email to the investigators and to the city as well, so that we can track. I think we were gonna change it so that it would send an email to the store as well, so that they could keep their own internal records as well. But that's the way it's set up right now.
Okay. And then, if you found that they had missed something, what happens as a result of that?
I mean, I think a lot of it is about, making sure that we don't see continuous problems with the same stores, or problems where they're entering stuff wrong or incorrectly describing the items or serial numbers or things like that. I think if we saw continued failures of the audits, then they could have, I think most of it will be teaching moments with the business. to make sure that they're complying to the city code. But if we saw continued problems with the same store over and over again, then that could result in suspension or revocation or fines or some things like that, I guess.
Thank you. Do members of the task force have questions about Title III, Chapter 28, or general conversation on it? Shelley?
I have one question about the language proposed back by the city. It says all employees are required. I'm wondering if it should read all employees and owners. Who sometimes an owner is rather an absent owner, and maybe requiring the owners to do that would actually be helpful.
Yeah, we can do that. I just got the wording from, the liquor ordinance.
So
Liquor
it's
code,
identical
so-
to what we did
Yeah,
there?
Yep. So, but we can certainly add all employees, including owners.
Could I ask a clarifying question? Is the intent that, imagine an owner, they just own it, but they don't operate the business? Would your thought that they should understand it, or just people that are doing the transactions?
I would think that the person who owns the business should be held accountable and fully responsible for the activities of the business, not just an absentee owner. I don't know if it adds value or not. It's
Do other members have an opinion on the item?
I don't have a problem with ownership having to go through and understand if they're brand new at it, you know, and then they're up to date on what exactly is required. If you're asking your employee to do something, you should be aware of what you're asking on that part of it, so you know, because you're gonna get somebody to push back, well, here's why.
Nancy?
I understand it if they're participating in it. I have no idea if they're allowed to be, absolute. They only provide the money, and they hire managers who would then be the people who would need to know the rules. So I don't think we need to get real technical, that if you're an hands-on owner, then you need to do this, and if you're, some investment company in Florida, then you maybe don't need to do it.
I don't know who to ask this to, but if an owner is operating the business, would they also be considered an employee?
Yes.
Okay. All right, I think probably that is sufficient, at least in my opinion. Okay, thanks for the question. Any other questions on this section?
Okay. I'm on the costume jewelry section.
Yes.
Um,
Can you give us a page for that?
It's page 7 of 92.
Thank you.
Was the council aware that the definition of jewelry says costume jewelry is excluded, and still were uncomfortable with this section in the precious gems?
We did not discover that until after we went back and we're going through the definitions
it.
with the police department.
Okay.
Unfortunately, that was not brought up during the council meeting.
Okay, so we could just say we're comfortable with it as is, and
I agree.
they would have, okay.
The other concern was about adding the two additional items to the definition of secondhand goods, and if that would affect new owners, and so we did identify potential new licensees that it would affect, and we've reached out to them and asked them, and so far we've had no comment.
A clarifying question on that. Am I correct to assume that the city's general position is if you notify the people and they don't comment on it, that they must agree? That seems to be what they do for the city works things, the public works things.
I don't think that we assume that they agree, that they agree, but we hope that if they don't agree, they at least let us know.
Okay. Well, I would make a motion to approve, chapters 24 through, well, I guess it's chapter 24 in its entirety as submitted to us tonight. Can I get a second?
Sure.
All right, seconded by Shelley. Any further discussion on the matter? Okay. All those in favor of approving Title III, Chapter 24 as presented tonight, please say aye and raise your hand. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay and raise your hand. The motion carries. Right. That takes us to Title III, Chapter 28. Rental licensing. Before the police officers leave, I have a question. In Title V, there's a section where it says that bomb threats are illegal to make in city code. Do you know if bomb threats are generally illegal, notwithstanding city code?
Yes, they would be.
Okay.
So like a threats of violence.
So do you think that, in your opinion, if you're willing to provide it, would you think that eliminating the section in city code that says you can't make bomb threats, and here's what bomb threats are, is not needed because it's illegal otherwise in the state?
I mean, it would be covered under state statute too, so if that's, I don't know what our attorney thinks about that.
Well, generally, we've been kind of eliminating things that are redundant, that are covered by state statute, as long as, obviously, as long as we're able to use state statute to prosecute something.
If you place a bomb threat and you cause fear in people and causes people to feel like their lives are in danger, or cause panic, or, like at a school or whatever, yeah, I mean, that would be covered under state statutes.
And that's the direction we would go as far
Okay.
as criminal charges.
Okay,
Statute.
okay. Thank you very
Yeah.
much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a great evening.
You too. Next order of business is the final review and approval of Title III, Chapter 28 rental licensing, which is included in the packet. Let's see. So there's not a prompt. I don't know if the city had any comments on it in particular. Okay. I did have a question. Did anyone have questions about this? Nancy?
I was not at the meeting when things were discussed, but it appears that the vast majority of things that are highlighted were mostly moved or shifted around so that it's not really substantive changes.
Yes,
Is that,
I think perhaps an exception is the 75-mile rule. I don't know if
Okay.
that was in there before, but we eliminated the specific counties.
okay.
No, and they also added in the licensing for the manager, which is new.
A question that I had was on the wording, and this would be, let's see. Find the page here. Page 20. Yes, thank you. Page 51 of 92. So I had questions about this last time. I was, something that I had not realized, I talked with Jared about it, and he clarified, was that this long list, so item 13 is a list of, like 19 different things that if someone does, they can constitutes disorderly use. I didn't catch the part where if you go back to page 49, it says that it has to be on the licensed premises. So if someone, say, has a DUI, but it's just at Walmart, that doesn't count. If they have a DUI on the licensed premises, then that counts. And that, to me, I think is, I like that. It means it's pertinent. I was a bit, I see the wording specific on page 51, and we took part 1 and 2 crimes, deleted part 1 or 2, because those were defined in Minnesota state statute, and we shoved it together. It's a bit rough the way it reads, and something specific that I was curious about is it says narcotics drug laws, which isn't a crime. murder's a crime, assault's a crime, but narcotics, drug laws isn't a crime. But also, I was curious, in Minnesota, we've now legalized some forms of THC not derived from cannabis, but the federal laws haven't changed. And I was, there's this bridge between the two where things are still illegal federally, but our state is taking action. And I know right now there's pending legislation, whether or not it'll make it through the House and the Senate, that's anyone's guess. But I was curious if people had thoughts about the narcotics part, or if we could clarify that somehow. Because I think that we probably don't mean if you're doing weed in your apartment, notwithstanding if it's like illegal to smoke in your apartment, that should be a reason to be evicted. Do people have opinions on that? I'm open to any suggestion, maybe to just make it more readable as well.
I think that where it says weapons also, because it's not illegal, if you have a permit to carry, it's not illegal to have a gun. But if there was some sort of weapons violation, that would be a different situation. So I think that you're right, that there could be some cleaning up of this language.
I do agree with that, and I would actually maybe ask the city to take a stab at that and bring it back. The narcotics and drugs, I mean, is THC even a narcotic?
That's what I was wondering.
I mean, that's the one you
It's a drug, but
referenced.
is
It's
it
drug,
actually a
but
narcotic?
I don't know.
If Kara was here, she would know.
I won't ask why, no.
She has a small business.
But I think we could clarify what is illegal drug use or something, or violations of state narcotics, state and federal law. I mean, we could clarify that in the wording.
Nancy?
I appreciate trying to be specific about this, because I imagine it's a difficult issue in real life. But spelling all these things out feels just a different set of difficult. I'm not exactly sure why these particular things were picked versus other things. So I'm just wondering if we could refer to them more in general, rather than, carnal abuse. Whew, wow, that's kind of an open question about what that means. So I guess in the wording of it, I'm wondering if we could be a little more general and refer to broader areas of crime, if you want to call it that.
Do you think that felony might be a right word? Or I don't know if there's
Well,
items listed here that aren't felonies.
There are gross misdemeanors, which are probably considered fairly
Serious.
serious also. So,
Jared, do you have an opinion on a simplifying term we could use?
Well, I think there's no exact simplifying term for all of it. I mean, I don't know that you want to just specify gross misdemeanors and felonies, because there are crimes that you may not just think are pertinent to having in the crime-free housing ordinance. I don't know, but we can certainly try to tighten it up in terms of the list. I think the question that I have is whether or not we have this on the agenda for approval. Do we need to bring this back, or do we want to just give some direction to staff to kind of tighten this section up and approve it, assuming that's going to be kind of edited and tightened up by staff?
I'm open to that. I think that from my consideration, I'd like to see the language clarified. I think that's the first concern. The second concern is I personally don't think that, say, drug possession alone should be a sufficient reason for someone to lose their housing. Selling drugs, that's a different story, but that's my personal consideration. I don't know how much I don't know how much I care to fight it, because I don't really suspect that the city's going to really railroad a person out of housing because they had marijuana. That doesn't seem to be the character of the city. But maybe Chris can comment.
I was
Would
waiting
never
for
know.
that. No,
Okay.
would not be the characteristics of the city.
Okay, go to,
Yeah, basically, what we want to say is that we don't want any criminal activities. Or why list all these things? Just criminal activities, just one word. Isn't that adequate to cover all these things? Or is there certain criminal activities we allow and some of them we don't allow? Is that kind of why you list some of them?
Shirley?
I would suggest that for a layperson who is actually going to check this out and maybe dealing with an eviction, having specific lists is very helpful. Because the average person reading this isn't going to be a lawyer. It's going to be probably somebody who owns a single-unit rental family and wants to evict somebody from their property, and they want to understand what qualifies. I think it's very important to give both the landlord and the tenant some specifics in this case, rather than referring to a vague criminal statute that they have no clue where to look up and find. I think that has immense value in the code,
Okay,
whether we like the detail or not.
go to,
So does that mean that we are listing here for the help of the landlord or tenant or somebody to look at that? Then by listing some of them, are we excluding some other? I don't know what is the whole list of possible criminal activities. That's one of my concerns.
I don't know if an easy example comes to your mind, Jared, that there's a really good crime we should consider including in the list.
Well, I think the point of this is to list crimes that have an effect on others within the vicinity of
Yep.
where they're living. So if you could think, I don't know, like Godin said, I don't have an entire list of crimes that I carry around in my head, but if I can think of a cyber crime or something that it might be illegal, but is not necessarily something related to the use of the property, right? So I think you want to think about, to the extent that you're going to edit these, which ones are related to that use and which ones are not.
I thought the example that just popped into my head would be like credit card fraud. If you committed credit card fraud, that doesn't necessarily mean that it affects the people that live in your building unless it was fraud against them. But that type of thing, I think, is maybe something that wouldn't be listed in here.
So it seems like it's the crimes which affect people directly and physically. Like a credit card crime does not affect you physically, but it can affect you monetarily. So it's the physical part of it is what we are trying to avoid. Is that kind of why we list some of these?
I think that's partially true, but embezzlement and fraud are listed, and I would call those financial crimes myself.
Oh, they are.
And I could understand a landlord just flat out not wanting someone who commits a bunch of crimes living in their units. But I don't know that makes it legal for them to kick them out, so.
There's processes for all of that to go through. It's just, this is one thing referring back to, here's another documentation. It also means that the property, the ownership of that, their lease is also prime too. This is just kind of like an adjunct to that of being able to reference back on.
I mean, because earlier in this, we refer very specifically to 609, 321 through 324, blah, blah, blah. So,
So maybe to that end, maybe we could strike the weapons clause, because that is covered by .7, which prohibits the unlawful possession, transportation, sale, or use of a weapon. And the way you use a weapon is to assault someone generally, and that's in the list, probably a couple of different places. Do people have opinions on removing the clause about drug laws or amending it in a way?
I guess I'm wondering if we need 13 at all, or if this is just a catch-all summary that is just getting us all hung up and we don't even need it.
Jared, do you have an opinion on that?
Well, it's certainly a laundry list of crimes. So the question, it's really a policy question. Do you think that these lists of crimes are relevant to, the ultimate end goal here of the crime-free housing policy or not? And I'm not trying to put it off on you, but
Yep.
ultimately, I mean, yes, as Task Force Member Nystuen says, you could excise the whole section and you still have 13, 14, 15 other crimes listed. But if you think some of these are still relevant, you could include them.
I think that Nancy has a good suggestion, and I think that we should remove 13, because the items, if I look through this list, 1 is about gambling, 2 is prostitution, 3 is controlled substance, 4 is alcohol, 5 is a disorderly house, which is pretty vague and could mean a lot of these things, noisy assemblies, weapons and assault, et cetera. So I think that we could remove 13 and still be adequately protected by the other 18 items on the list.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that, to take 13 out, basically the other items here, 1 through 12 or so, list all that, but not, it has the same effect, I think.
And 12 also says in like B and C, shall not engage in an act intended to facilitate illegal activity or won't allow the household to permit the dwelling or the dwelling to be used to facilitate illegal activity, which is pretty broad.
If we're gonna do that and send this back and not do a final vote on it, I would propose that we edit the list a bit. I don't see any clause that prohibits forcible rape, robbery. I mean, those are very egregious crimes against a person. And I'm all for editing the language to make some minor edits, but I think we have really gone through this code quite a bit, and I don't necessarily want to see it come back for another vote over something that really is not a significant or necessarily needed change.
Could I ask a clarifying point
Sure.
on that? Number 9 says it gives 2 codes which prohibit assault as defined. And so I don't know, I wouldn't presume to know the strict definition of assault, but
I don't either.
Jared, I'll ask you, do you think that assault would include sexual assault?
Off the top of my head, I can try to look this up now
Okay.
and see, but I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
Could I just interject on this quick? BJ from the fire department.
Sure.
Sorry, I had to join virtually. I'm out of town for training, but I can't tell who's in the room, but I know we had a long discussion last month about this with PD. Is there anybody from the PD in the room? Because I thought there were some specific reasons to keep parts of this section intact. So I would just want to make sure that we had background from them if they're not there.
They have left for the evening here.
Okay.
Shelley, do you think that, would you agree that 12A that says that the household or guest will not engage in illegal activity? I think that that's a blanket statement, and I think that if we have missed an enumeration that we do care about, that it would be an illegal activity, and that would be sufficient.
Maybe, maybe not. I mean, there's a lot of times, yeah, you've engaged in this, but then they have to prove it. I kind of would defer to fire chief there, I think was who was on, that I wasn't here for the meeting last month. So I don't necessarily want to see changes and have to go back, but I think if we are gonna make changes there that are substantive, we do need to check with PD. And so this would need to be re-reviewed, and I don't know how strongly you and Nancy feel about that change, other than the cleanup, but if you feel strongly enough, I think we should take the time and go through the process, but if you really don't, I would propose that we let the city clean it up and vote to pass it with the clerical rewording on those. It's up to you, or well, it's up to the
Sure.
group, I guess. but-
I do think that it is worth clarifying. Let me, unlawful sale, possession, or controlled substance.
Or perhaps it's a matter of having the time to look at it, make sure there are statutes in reference to for that, so that that is covered in the list, rather that the statute referenced that pertains versus the paragraph list, so that we cover those specific categories in the statute, so that there's time to verify, yes, this statute covers that category. Then that would take care of making sure everything is listed in there, but not the big paragraph, but it's referenced by statute.
Would
Because
it be overly onerous to ask if it could be cross-referenced, if the city would be willing to say, you're actually missing forcible entry? I don't know. I mean, that would probably be what we'd have to do to find out if we're missing something.
Chair and members of the task force, it sounds like it might make sense that we go through it again and identify the statutes and match them up with some of the crimes listed in section 13, and then also have someone from PD here to explain, because even if we do that, there may be some that the task force says, well, I still don't understand why we have that in the list. And having someone from PD here who can explain, the basis for that, why we've had it historically.
I agree.
So we could, motion to table this item to the next meeting, and do that work.
I think that would be appropriate. Any disagreements?
I'll even make the motion for you.
Okay,
I'll make a motion, we table this until we've got the input we need to make the corrections and vote on it.
sure. I'll second that. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Motion carries. Okay. So that item notwithstanding, is there anything else remaining in the rental licensing that we'd like to work through? Sure. Could you come and sit in front of one of the microphones, please? And could you tell us your name for the record?
My name is Cheryl Leach, and I own a property at Ridgeview condominiums, and I don't know any of you people really, Dan, maybe a little. I don't know if any of you own rental property or not. Because I do, and it's a concern to me, owning a property at Ridgeview, when it talks about all of these things that you're talking about, not necessarily leaving in, you're tabling it, I think. But it says at the top of this, eviction for 3 violations. So, in reading through this, is it saying that 3 violations or 3 police calls? And then the landlord has to evict that tenant?
Can, not has to.
That's my understanding.
Is it can though, not
I
required?
think it's a
No,
shall.
So,
It's
in
good.
listing these,
Okay.
for example, the resident shall not engage in illegal activity. So does that mean that that person has to do illegal activity 3 times before he can be evicted, or before the HOA board can request that he be evicted? For example, if a tenant is caught selling drugs illegally, or stealing, breaking an entry, or cutting the catalytic converter off a vehicle, he has to be caught doing these types of things 3 times
It would,
before we can require the landlord to evict that person?
I
Is
would
that what
defer
that
to a
means?
lease. It depends, at least as a property manager, it depends on the seriousness of the crime or the activity, let me rephrase that. The seriousness of the activity taking place and the documentation to it. Over my course of years of being at the property I've had, I had one incident, based on the severity of that incident, that homeowner lost his home. But it was based on the severity of the incident. I've had other cases where it did take 3 times, because it was a difference and it was a preponderance of the activity. So in your case, it would also be your rules. Your bylaws. What are they? What activities are they, would be one thing looking at for a condominium on that. Because mine is my lease, here are my rules, here's what you can and cannot, and if you violate these, here are the consequences. So part of that comes with city code is using, and part of that is coming on what documents that person is signing and agreeing to abide by.
The other question that I have is, how does the city of Burnsville know when a property becomes a rental property?
I'll direct that to Chris.
We hope that the property owner comes forward, is knowledgeable of the laws, and applies for a rental license. But we don't always know that. Properties change hands all the time.
So at Ridgeview, there's 402 units,
Correct.
and there's no city control over how many rental properties there are there.
We can't control it.
It's your bylaws.
The association has control over that.
Yep.
We look to the city to assist us in that because of the fact that rental properties have to be inspected every 3 years. You have to have a rental license. So if the city is requiring a rental license of rental property, why isn't the city aware of the rental properties?
We are aware of the ones that are licensed.
Yeah, of the people who were truthful and came forth and said, I have a rental property. But
Correct.
those that are not doing that, how does the city know? And how does the city,
Oh, can I interject real quick? Chris, would it be accurate to say that someone could inform the city that there is a rental at a location, and then the city could investigate that and make a determination whether or not it is a rental and has to be licensed?
Absolutely.
Okay, so,
A lot of our unlicensed properties that come in are almost exclusively out of police and fire department as well.
okay,
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
So a lot of the information we get for properties that are unlicensed may come from police and fire department as well. So if they report to a call, they'll indicate that there's tenants there, they didn't talk to an owner, and we with that information know that we have an unlicensed rental.
So here's a case in point. I manage a mobile home park. I have homeowners and I have renters. In our lease, it states as a homeowner, you may not rent that home. If you rent that home, you then violated your lease, and yes, I will come after you for that. So it's your bylaws, the association bylaws, that have the greater strength in that. The documentation may come from them saying, we were at your property for this police call, this fire call, and there were persons in there, and you guys are going, wait, hey, that's not the ownership. Therefore, your bylaws would come into play, how they're written, whether or not you allow rentals, and if you do, how many you allow. And that's something your association would have to go through as far as those rules go by.
We have many associations that don't permit rentals,
Yeah,
and that's all up to the association and its members to make that determination.
yes.
Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, I think there are some associations that say up to a certain percentage of the units
Yes.
can be rented. No
They
more
may-
than
they can make the rules.
20% or something like that.
Right?
And one of the problems with that is once a building becomes owned by a lot of rental owners, they're not gonna vote to get rid of the rentals, and they'll, a lot of times, they're the majority of the building now, and so
Exactly.
you're stuck with that.
I think that Ridgeview has police calls almost every day. and a lot of it is because of the rentals. And if we could only get more cooperation from the city, if the city could go just to those 402 units and say, are you owner occupied?
Can't.
We have worked with the association management group down there as early as last year on this. As you know, these properties change hands all the time, and we simply cannot have one person working down there full-time to try to get cooperation from the owners down there. There's too many.
I know. It's very much of a dilemma, and we're just trying to get some help somewhere to
Yep.
try to control. We've had 2 really, really bad fires caused by tenants. So, thank you, I really appreciate your time. Thank you very
welcome.
much.
Did you have any other concerns that you wanted to talk to this group about?
I'm sorry,
Did you have any other concerns that you wanted to talk to this group about?
It's
in-
okay.
That's in the code?
it's okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other remaining items on 328 we'd like to discuss before we move forward?
Did we take a vote on that last?
We
To
took
table?
We took a vote to
Yes,
table.
I
and it
got the
passed.
motion, the second, I didn't get the
It was-
vote.
It was unanimous. Okay, then we will proceed to item 5, which is questions and comments from the task force. Submitted for this evening, do city attorneys or staff have anything to add to the attached packet? Which is, well, empty except for one comment from the public.
Yeah, we didn't have any questions from the task force that needed outside addressing, and we did get the one comment regarding recreational bonfire permits.
Yes, which briefly summarized is the language should be clearer and more straightforward. If someone fills out an application, they should be asked to acknowledge each of the items listed on the current form, rather than one box for all. This way the information can sink in a little better. That's really not a code item, that's more of a policy item. And I would, I guess, probably say that's something for the fire department. Are they the ones in charge of that form? Okay. Nancy?
If I could just add that it's not related to this, but I think there are several homeowners who happen to live right next door to me who are unaware of any anything necessary for them to have their fire right next to their house with grass and this far from my fence. So, as we're discussing all of these things, it's like, wow, it's great we have all these rules and regulations for, bonfires and fire pits and whatever, but I think that we have lots of homeowners who don't know about that.
So that's probably another policy thing of
Just,
when do you,
just stating that, I
when
don't
do you
think the code can do anything about that, but if you have a chance to let the citizenry know, that'd be great.
I know the city does a great job in public communication. Does the city ever send out, something like that? Like, hey, it's May, it's kind of bonfire season, start of it, or it's the fall?
I would give an example that's a little off track. Recently this week, the city had trucks out trimming trees. Now, notification was come out. Now, if it came on my water bill, that's not something I'm gonna see unless you bold that bad boy out, scared the heck out of my kids at home. All of a sudden, my trees are being cut. Driveway's blocked, I can't get into my home, and it's like, okay, who are you? So, for that being said, it's how you get that information out to people so that it's not just something you see every day and recognize it, because like new people, you do need to remind them that, hey, here's the rules, you come into our city, or every 5 years, I haven't had a bonfire a couple years, wanna have a nice little fire, here's the rules for it. So a little bit, I know it's policy, but a little way of doing it, cause yeah, it was quite a surprise to see these big trucks all there, my driveway blocked. And I'm like, okay, well, they said they notified. Okay, well, I'll take that up with my city. So here's a perfect time to say, how do you do this so people do get the reminder that, yes, you want to be more than 2 feet from your house and more than 2 feet from your neighbors and
Yeah.
all that
Yeah,
kind of stuff.
and the city, of course, attempts to notify people in many different ways. Like something like that, maybe that's, usually like in the springtime, we do send out, some information in the Burnsville Bulletin, because we found that that is the single most effective way to get to our community members. And so, yes, maybe maybe they have in the past, and I never really paid that much attention, put something in the Burnsville Bulletin about recreational fires and those kinds of things. And if they don't, it's a great idea to do that. But, I'm not sure if BJ's still on with us here, maybe he knows. Oh,
Yeah.
there you go.
I'm on. Yeah, we communicate through social media, the Burnsville Bulletin. There's a number of different mediums we try to get across to folks about recreational fires. I would tell anybody that if their neighbor's having one or they're concerned, call 911 and we'll come out and chat with the folks and educate them.
Oh, that'll go over.
Because when we did a survey, there was no one way to reach everybody. So we try to cover a bunch of mediums, and that still doesn't necessarily reach everybody. So
Nancy, did you get that number, or do you want them to repeat it?
911, you bet.
Nancy, so let's
Anonymous
say
tips
you don't have a huge concern, but maybe a slight concern that they're not aware of the information, then I think you could probably, either let your neighbor know
Mac.
there are these rules, and if you don't feel comfortable doing that, there's always an anonymous way that you could submit that to the city so that we can let them know that they have rules.
Okay, good to,
well, and
So that we can let them know that they have rules.
okay, good to.
Well, and in that case, Mac, if I can just say, honestly, everybody's worried about calling 911. It's confidential who called, so we can't disclose that. So I would encourage people to call in real time. Because the challenge is we get people that call us on our 10-digit number, and if it's not happening at the time, it's tough for us to track down who was there, what were they burning, all that kind of stuff. It's much easier if we can, in real time, talk to the folks. So I know people are intimidated to call 911 on something that's not that big of a concern, but I would encourage people to do it, or unless you want to go talk to your neighbor yourself, as Mac had said. So it's hard for us to go days later and chat with people. So the best solution is if you chat with your neighbors, and I would tell you that most of the time when we get rec fire complaints, it's less about the rec fire and it's more of a neighborhood dispute that just boiled over because of the rec fire. So
If I could add to this too, that's an ongoing conversation at the city, is how do we communicate? For everything, public works to fires to you name it.
It's difficult.
And you can put it everywhere and someone's still not gonna read it, they're not gonna pay attention to it. But it doesn't stop us from trying to improve at all times to get the message out in better ways. And a lot of times it's like they're talking about, just tell your neighbor, there are rules for this and the city has them. And they should be pulling a permit for that fire anyways.
I won't be talking to them about that.
Oh. Well, then there's 911.
Okay, well, let's jump into Title 4 and 5 then, assuming there's no further questions. As is our tradition, we'll kind of take it page by page. I think there's probably gonna be a bunch of pages that we're just gonna skip because they were all deletions, but, I did see that looks like there was a suggestion so on page 60 of 92, Nancy had a suggestion that I think was just put in place, so I don't think probably any real, questions there. So I would say perhaps we jump all the way to page 68 of 92, which is swimming pools, if there are no objections. Godin?
I have a question, I probably didn't understand it, but on page 58,
Okay,
what is that, heating code reserved, piping code reserved?
I'm sorry, what are, on
What
page
page?
58?
58 and 92.
58,
So he's asking about
what
the
does that
reserve.
mean, so
oh, okay.
we don't regulate that, is that kind of what you say, or?
Yeah, what is the, in parentheses, reserved, headings for?
So as you've seen, when you come along some of the codes, the code for that has been removed, but the chapter title had been reserved. In most of these situations, we're removing them completely now. So just because they say reserved, there was no code underneath that. It was just the chapter title was reserved for future code as if needed. And in most cases, we're gonna ask you to remove those at this point.
So for example, go to page 61 of 92. On the top, it says, chapter 42, 4-2, plumbing and gas piping reserved. That is being recommended to be removed. Or chapter 4-3, heating code reserved. Again.
Okay, makes sense.
So what does, I'm used to these kind of codes here, and we usually see the code, so, there's no, at this point, are you saying that plumbing and gas piping, there's no code?
Not for us.
There's no language.
No city code.
Right.
There's state code.
Oh, this is not city code, okay. So, because it's, further down says that we are using, Minnesota Building Code.
Right, that's why we don't need it, because we use the state code, we don't need a city code.
Okay,
It's the first sentence on page 59.
so basically, this is almost like saying, title, these things are superseded by city code, but we just didn't take this out because in future, if you want to add that, it's a placeholder.
It was a place, they left a placeholder in there where it used to be.
Okay.
And we're saying we don't need that
don't
placeholder
even need the
anymore, we think we should remove it.
Yep. And if I'm interpreting this right, we're gonna remove chapters 2, 3, 4, and 5. It looks like completely, and we go right from the building code to swimming pool regulations, because it's not needed. Okay, so, do people have questions on swimming pool regulations? Nancy made a comment that wanted more specificity on what the fees would be for.
Yeah, it just says fees shall be established, and now it says for building permits, but I'm guessing that it's for, building a swimming pool.
Building permit fees.
Which is a building permit.
All right. Okay.
So we have fees
Yeah.
established already.
Instead of, it's old journalism training, don't just say fees when it could mean anything, so, all right. I'm good.
Right, we don't charge people to swim in their backyard.
Yeah, well, maybe we should.
Okay. Am I correct that, so on page 69, it says prefabricated swimming pool, so that's referring to the prefabricated, and it has to be made of molded polymeric or fabric walls. So if someone has a prefab pool made out of concrete, for example, that would be a prefab pool.
It could be anything.
It what?
It could be anything as long as it falls under certain parts of the building code or plumbing code.
So I think what I'm confused by is the definition of prefabricated describes the materials that are in it. So if I made it out of any other material not listed there, it wouldn't be a prefabricated pool.
Where do you see this?
On the definitions on page
68.
68 of 92.
Otherwise, it's swimming pool.
Right,
Which does require a permit.
right.
So basically, they're saying you don't need a permit if it's of this type.
Yep.
I'm losing where your definition is, I'm sorry.
68, the next page.
Yeah, so I'm just confused by the definition. Could you tell me what a molded polymeric is?
It's what you buy, it's the kiddie pools. You see the plastic kiddie pools in
Okay.
people's yards? That's what that is. They're pre-molded and you go pick them up in shape. They hold their shape. They called them storable originally. You keep them in your garage in the winter.
Even some that are of a type, like a tarp style, that's also the type of plastic that's used.
Okay.
So any plastic,
Okay,
that would be.
okay. So, to be pedantic, if it was made out of concrete, it's just a pool then? Okay,
Well, it specifically says here, something that is designed to be
Storage.
stored, readily disassembled, and then reassembled to its original integrity.
Seasonal.
okay, thank you.
I don't disassemble
I
concrete.
think concrete would be hard to disassemble.
Yeah, hard to store for sure.
It may seem like that, but there's many different types of concrete. And there's some lightweight concrete that's very, very lightweight. It's very porous, right, like a, stones that, like a pumice stone or something as an example.
Probably not
So-
making,
So I have to be
Swimming pool.
open to all of those, prefabricated, not just,
thank you.
I have to, can't be just for the plastics. It has to be for the concrete and the steels and the.
Okay. The next time I see comments in depth are page 71. Comment, we have no delegation, we have or authority to regulate operation of public pools. I see something stricken. We have, yeah, I see that, I guess, repeated multiple times, that we can't regulate public pools except for construction. Then I think there's, a comment at the bottom about, so I think there's that, Nancy makes the question about the date, May 31st through September 1, and then a follow-up question is that even valid anymore? So should the date be removed from this text?
I think that next question related to chapter 1305, rather than the,
Yeah.
I was just confused about the need for specific dates requiring people to have their backyard pool operating on May 31st, even if it's,
We're just talking about the prefabricated ones. Is that right?
No,
No.
Nope.
Pool operation.
All pools.
Yes, this is
I assume
pool
we're-
operation requirements, all pools.
Must be maintained.
I would think we would especially be talking about in-ground, which is what I call them. Again, my question is, if it's just, you don't want people's filtration systems to break down and then you have an algae pond in someone's backyard, but it's requiring these particular dates just seems a funny way to do that. But
That's because pools, pardon me, usually operate Memorial to Labor Day.
But-
At least for a lot of properties.
Right,
that are outdoor
I'm thinking
pools.
a different neighbor has a pool right behind me, and they don't always get it ready until June. You know, and I'm thinking, wow, are they in violation of this just because they don't
Get it ready.
open it up and swim in it till later in the summer? So I'm not gonna turn them in, but
Is that,
I think that's a good question.
It
I
is.
mean, you know, are we talking private homeowners here?
I think we are, because it says
Yeah.
all pools.
Right. So is the point that
Chris?
they don't
I'll,
become a
I'll just
public
let
nuisance,
the
or?
commission know here, we have a lot of problems with pools.
Would you tell
I'm
us
sure you
a few of
do.
them?
Pools
With-
are,
That they've been abandoned, they're not in use during an extended period,
Maintain, not maintain.
they're not maintained, they become safety hazards, we don't have fences up around them. You know, a cover is not considered a barrier. And unfortunately, I'm terrified we're gonna have a kid floating in one of these days. And they do become nuisances, whether it be full of stagnant water, mosquito breeding areas, it is a problem. So
I
I think the
understand that,
intention,
but
yeah.
are dates of operation the way to
I think they're pretty
get
consistent.
around that?
I think I think they're pretty consistent. I don't know if any of you have jumped in a lake on the week before Memorial Day. It isn't real comfortable. And, but during that time frame, I'd say 98%. Are we gonna go out there in June 1st that somebody's pool's
English
not
swim
in
shorts?
operation? No. This is just, right now, I think more of a guideline that we wanna keep that water circulated, we wanna keep them maintained, we wanna make sure your fences are in good shape, and you're taking care of your pools.
Would it be sufficient to say all pools and their filtration pumping units shall be maintained? I mean, because if they don't run them, it's like, they're not going to be maintained.
But you
So-
could have someone that just not running it because they don't want to run it. So is that in service covering the fact that you're utilizing it as well as maintaining it in good condition?
Shall be in service and maintained, and
It's-
it's hard
it's-
to say in service in the winter.
So I mean, the intent here is that it's open and running in the summer, right?
Correct.
During what is generally considered to be the season in our climate. You know, obviously, if we had a snowstorm in May and it was still frozen, we probably wouldn't enforce that. Could
And
we
we
put
also have
something-
incidents where some multifamily housing have pools for their residents, and then maybe because they're a poor property manager there, they're not opening the pool for the summer when it's supposed to be part of the amenity of the complex.
Those are
But that's not
public
the point of
pools.
this, is it, though?
Those are considered public
Those
pools?
are public pools, and we have no authority to regulate public pools.
Oh, well, then this is
Sure.
just,
A homeowners association? Would that be a public pool? If there's a homeowners association involved, group of townhomes, or is that a private pool?
Yes,
Public.
it's public.
Okay, thank you, sorry.
Chair, members of the task force, I think we do need a point of clarification here. It's not designed, the sentence is not meant to make someone open up their pool for the summer, and as it's written, it kind of says that. So I think there should be an edit. All pools and their filtration pumping units shall only be in service and maintained through May 31st through September 1st.
But that would mean the inverse, that they have to close it down,
Exactly.
September 1st.
And they couldn't open it May 15th.
And I think that if we say it has to be maintained, period, because the winter maintenance is, well, I'm not using it, so there's nothing to do until I start using it again. And if you're running it in the summer and you don't maintain it, my neighbor has a pool, it'll break down, it won't be maintained. So if you're not running your pumps, they're gonna fail, they won't be maintained. I think the maintenance point alone is sufficient to carry.
I think we have alternate methods if we have a private pool owner who's either abandons his pool or doesn't maintain it. We find out that we have the start of an ice pond in November, that we could probably address that issue.
Again, if you're, I assume the city isn't going out and doing something because someone opened it on the May 15th, or they,
No.
closed it August 15th or something. So it's not a huge deal, I just thought it was kind of an odd way to put in a rule, but
I think you're right, Nancy. I don't think that, I think there's a better way to word this and accomplish the purpose.
So I'll suggest again, if the language only said all pools and their filtration pumping units shall be maintained, period, would that be sufficient to say that you have to keep it maintained?
I'd like
I
to
don't
see
think so.
maintained
that's-
defined if you were gonna go that near,
Right.
that broad. Because, if you've got 4 inches of water in it, are you maintaining it? You have a toddler, you want a toddler pool, now all of a sudden,
Well, it is defined, actually. It's defined at the very beginning,
Is
where it
it?
says all pools must be maintained in a proper state of repair and operated according to the manufacturer's printed operating instructions. So perhaps that entire sentence is redundant, because it already says it must be maintained and operated according to the correct instructions.
I have a question. So if somebody doesn't open their pool for a particular summer, they leave it closed, have they maintained their pool?
If it's been properly closed, I would assume it has been.
That'd be my assumption as well.
If they maintain it during the summer months, because now you have a thawed-out pond that if you don't keep some kind of chemicals in there, you're going to go to scum. You're
That was
gonna
my
get
point.
algae growth, you're gonna get things on that part of it, just because if that water's sitting there and it thaws out.
Yes, that has happened.
Right, I'm just saying, cause I know from years of experience that we've never, with a certain we've never had a green pool because it's been properly maintained. That includes before the freeze, and that includes once that water starts to thaw, that you do have to do, you maybe not test it, but chemically you do have to support it to keep it from turning into the algae pond.
I think the first two sentences are sufficient. All pools must be maintained in a proper state of repair and operated following the manufacturer's printed operating instructions. During the period a pool is not in operation, it must be closed and maintained in compliance with the manufacturer's printed operating instructions. So, by my reading of that, there is no point in which a person is allowed to not have it in a maintained state. And that is obviously contextual based on the season. If it's the winter, it's empty, and if it's the summer, it's not an algae pond.
So what you mean is emptying the pool is adequate to avoid.
No.
It
no.
depends. Some pools you can actually completely empty, most you can't. 'cause of
Majority
the
of them
liners.
cannot because of damage.
Right.
You will damage that pool beyond belief. I've been at a property that did that, and she popped her out of the ground. So you do have to leave some water in that pool for
Have
balance.
to keep it down, yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Majority of them, I'd say 99% of them, you're gonna have to leave some water in there.
But since we're saying maintained, again, if they decide the pool's not open for the summer, they're still obligated to keep it not an algae pond, because we say it has to be maintained. It has to be in a proper state of repair. I'll ask this in the negative. Do you have any disagreements with that, Chris? I mean, because I have a very narrow view here, so you actually work with it.
I do not.
Okay. All right. Nancy?
Just to get technical, does everyone's pool manufacturer provide printed operating instructions?
They're supposed to?
Are they?
I have
It's
no
just
idea.
I don't know, Pools R Us puts in, a pool in your backyard. Do they have something in writing for how to maintain
All the
it?
equipment has very detailed
Okay.
information of how to maintain that system.
Okay,
Including the
Whether it's
finish.
built on site, the equipment is still has the instructions of what to do.
okay.
And maybe we can remove the word printed, because we know now that a lot of these things are digital.
Yep, good idea.
I like that.
Josh?
Is there a delineation between public and private?
Yes.
Because we
Yes.
see the Minnesota Department of Health, which is
Yes.
gonna drive majority of all this for both.
Yes.
Is it the Minnesota Department of Health that takes care of all public? Does the
Yes.
city get into,
Yes.
does the city start to override any or fill in some of the gaps of the department for
The
public?
tie-in is we do look at it for building code purposes. There's plumbing, electrical, and sometimes HVAC equipment that's tied to that we look at. And
From the
our-
city side, that's.
But I have that in our codes, in the Minnesota State Building Codes. It falls under those rules and
Food, pools, and lodging.
yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, they also do the engineering for public pools.
Oh, you're
Public-
talking DOH?
Yep,
Yeah, yeah, okay.
And then with private, it just falls under the construction requirements under the building code. So building code meaning electrical, plumbing, HVAC, building, and then just making sure we don't compromise structures. A lot of people want to build a pool within their house or outside of their house. We just want to make sure that when they're excavating, they don't compromise their structure at the same time. So,
Is there any objection, or I'll say, would people support the deletion of the sentence, all pools and their filtration pump units shall be in service and maintained from May 31st to September 1st? Would people support the removal of that sentence as a way to clarify? Okay,
I have no objection to it.
okay, all right, I think we'll call that a consensus. I'm not hearing a strong opposition.
I don't give a-
Okay. That, I believe, takes us to, page 72. And I don't know if there's anything left in pools. I think we're on to official maps. And Nancy had a question about, the definitions and, moving it before the purpose.
I didn't know what an official map was, and we dive into the purpose of it, and I didn't know what it was, so I wondered if the definition should come first and the purpose second, but it's not that big a deal. I might be the only one who didn't know what it was.
I think, Regina, you deal with zoning, right? Is that,
I do.
how does the city declare, you know, this is an official map?
That's a great question. I think I might defer to Jared on that. There's reference to, in some sections of Title 10, the zoning code, that reference the zoning map as a zoning official map. And then there's this section of Title 4 that talks about official map. And this was adopted, it looks like in 2005. And they're looking back at some of the history. It looks like the city used this as a way to bring in kind of small areas of the city and propose some future changes to some city streets, which they anticipated to come through at some point, so that people were aware that future roadways would come through. But it is a way to recognize basically future roadways and future expansion of our transportation plan. It's allowed through state statute, or is it required through state statute through the Minnesota Planning Act? I think Jared had some comments in the sidebar stating that maybe this is better to be located within our zoning code, or maybe even our subdivision section of the city code. So after consulting with our city attorney, idea is when we get to that chapter and Title 10, when the Planning Commission reviews that's something that will be transitioned over to that section. It just makes more sense to be in that area.
Get it out of
To
here.
Title
I would
10.
like to propose that Nancy's right, though, and you put the definition first.
For the purpose.
I think that's a good idea. So
Because
you can switch the definition.
Because the planning commission needs to host a public hearing for any amendments to Title 10, and city council makes those approval, it'll have to work its way through that process if there is agreement to remove it and place it in Title 10 or 11.
Sure.
We could switch the definition first in this go-around, and then when it migrates over to Title 10, it's all ready to go.
I like that.
Like that.
I think that takes us to the Fire Prevention Code 5, Chapter 5, 1. And that is page 76 and 82. Do we still have, is it BJ on the phone?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, clear.
I had a question about 511B2, and it's fuel storage prohibited. No person shall store or use any fuel, barbecue, torch, or other similar heating or lighting chemical or device in the locations designated in the previous section, B1. I'm slightly confused by that. When you say you can't store any barbecue, does that mean the ribs have to go inside? But also, when you say other similar heating, like, would that be like a George Foreman grill? You can't have that outside on the, that's my actual question. I don't know what barbecue means in this case. That's a weird definition, but when you say similar heating, do you mean by combustion? Or if someone has an electric skillet, they can't have those on a balcony?
Right, so people can't have a propane grill on a balcony, or, something of similar chemical or any type of similar heating, right? So if someone plugs in an electric griddle out there, that's fine.
Okay,
But this is specific to anything 3 or more dwelling units. So we're talking about that have a common hallway. So they're not townhomes, right? We're talking about really apartments or quad homes that have a common hallway. And then they can't use something of that type of heating on the deck or inside the building in any case, so.
Does that include charcoal
Yep,
grilling?
yep.
Right.
Any
Yep,
form of grilling.
any type of combustion.
Yep.
do you think that it would make sense to clarify combustion? Cause now I'll be serious, what do we mean by barbecue? Shall not use any fuel, barbecue, or torch.
A barbecue
Is there
grill.
a comma in the wrong place on that?
Right underneath there, under number 3, it says gas-fired barbecue grills.
Okay.
So this would be like a propane-fired barbecue grill.
Or briquettes.
So maybe it should just say barbecue grill.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah. That was what I was gonna say. I think Andrew's right, the word barbecue
Yeah, it
versus
looks like
we're
a
using
word was
barbecue
missing
grill.
there.
Yeah.
And we just need to make sure that we keep the fire or, because we also can't have people having fire tables on apartment decks either, so. This really is to any type of open flame on a multifamily dwelling.
No tiki torches.
Right.
Well, would that actually be prohibited? When it says lighting chemical, I assume that meant not illumination, but to start something on fire.
They use
Yeah.
a fuel, so any fuel burning would be a torch, yeah.
Yeah.
So tiki torches would be.
Not allowed.
Okay.
Chair?
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's
I
fine.
have been
Lost
looking
in
this
time.
way.
Do we have any instances where we have fire sprinkler out on patios? I've seen certain complexes that were more than 3, and they had patios out on the deck, decks and patios, above grade, on grade, what have you, but they each had a sprinkler from above that was allowing them to justify to be able to have each tenant have their barbecue, their charcoal, their gas grill. And I thought that was the most craziest design that I've ever seen. I wouldn't wanna live there, to open something up like that.
So
Do we have
newer
any
apartment
situations-
complex- Oh, sorry, I thought you were done.
Oh, do we have any situations like that in Burnsville?
So we have a handful of apartment complexes that do have sprinkler heads out on the balconies because they've been built recently enough where they're required. But we still do not allow grills out there. The only exception to that is in sub 3 about listed gas or electric grills that are permanently mounted and are essentially meant for that.
Okay.
They're self-contained, right? So they don't have the issues that the open combustion ones do. But we don't have an exception that because it's sprinklered, we allow them. We don't do that in Burnsville because lots of times you're trading off the sprinkler system and allowing combustible siding, things like that. And it's just because you have one sprinkler head doesn't keep it from being a catastrophe.
Exactly. That's a great peace of mind. Yeah, everything else around is combustible.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right, so if we, as we progress through onto page 77, I'm not seeing anything that stands out there. I guess there's a question, this appeal process is different than the other code sections, should it be changed to be consistent?
So BJ, maybe this is something that Eric and I noticed, that the appeal process in this, it basically says that the first point of appeal is to go to the fire chief and have them reconsider. But we were wondering if you would prefer that this go through our normal appeal process.
Let me check on that. There's a piece to this that I think is fire code referenced, so let me double check on that. But if it's not prescriptive in the fire code and how we have to adopt this, then yeah, I would prefer to follow what we're already doing.
All right, so we'll research that and come back to you.
Okay. So if we progress to page 78 and 79, I'm not seeing anything there. And I don't see anything. Substantive till perhaps page 83. I'll pause for a second. Does anyone have comments or questions before page 83. Okay, Nancy had a good question. Magazine means a building or structure? Is there another term that can be used?
I'll have to do some research, but I assume that comes out of the fire code and what they consider where they're housing the substance. So where the explosive substance is being held.
So indeed, magazine means a building?
That is an appropriate term
Is it?
for storing explosives, yes.
Oh, okay.
Learn something new on the definition.
Yeah.
It's the third definition that comes up when you Google it.
It is?
Store for arms, ammunition, explosives, and provisions for use in military operations.
Okay.
Now we know.
Then there was a question about railway, and it appears that, let's see, railway is defined as such only if passengers are carried.
I don't know the background behind that one, but I don't know why we wouldn't say passengers or goods or something like that, and or goods.
Because I would think the staff on cargo trains might not want to be exposed to
Yeah.
explosive, et cetera. But maybe it is allowed, because otherwise I don't know.
They may have to actually transport it separate from
We may want to
passenger
double check
trains.
that one just because of
We'll check that.
how close the rail line we have in town is to the quarry where they do blast, so we can look up that one as well.
Okay.
Just to make sure that we're covering this correctly.
And actually, I'm not seeing railway mentioned otherwise in the document. It's just a defined term. So perhaps
We don't need it.
Perhaps it
Perhaps
could be
outdated.
removed. Okay. Page 84 and 85. The city clerk does not issue these. Who does? Talking about permits.
That should get changed to fire chief or designee.
Okay.
Missed that one.
I think Nancy has a very interesting point about unsure how convictions of moral turpitude would disallow permits for explosives. I know that, and 10 years, that seems to be the highest one that I recall seeing. You can sell alcohol a lot quicker, I think.
For alcohol addiction, you can't get a permit, which, I don't know, someone had it in for alcoholics?
I looked, I had to look it up because when I saw your comment, and by definition, I'm very much in support of it. It's, I don't know if did you look up the definition of moral turpitude?
No, I feel like I know it well enough.
It's a legal concept, and it's an act or behavior that gravely violates the sentiment or accepted standard of the community. So if the community has a standard,
I know, it's been used
Yeah.
against gay people a lot.
I can see where that
Which
would
is
be, why
My
that's,
antenna go up.
got it.
Um,
Do you believe that it's a discriminatory comment against?
Well, I just don't, I honestly don't understand what that has to do with a permit for explosives. Or that you were treated for alcohol addiction 8 years ago, and somehow you can't.
So it's a 10 years part two, that's the problem.
Well,
It's the content of the things that keep you from getting this, and the length of time. I can see that if you had a conviction for
Blowing things
bombing
up.
a building or something, that totally makes sense.
So I would just tell you from my perspective, I don't have a ton of background with this, but just thinking through this, we're talking about commercial explosives, and we're talking significant commercial explosives, is that we don't want anybody that's, could be potentially unstable or wanting to do harm with those. to have access to them. So I think that's the length of time and why some of these have been chosen.
Could you give me some context on the city of Burnsville? Do we have a lot of explosive licensed people?
No, we have one plus then fireworks vendors. So I mean, there's one that's commercial that blasts multiple times a week. So,
And,
but then-
and is that licensed for the individual or the business?
I will have to check. I think it may be both, to be quite honest. I think the state fire marshal does part of it, and then we get to do part of it as well. So,
Okay.
And BJ, I noticed that it says the council shall deny the issuance. Do all of these permits have to go to council for approval?
I don't think so. That's where I gotta, now that we're digging into this, unfortunately, the fire marshal couldn't be here. We had a fire tonight, and he would know this off the back of his hand. So I
Okay.
need to pick his brain on this.
All right, we'll have to come back with more.
Okay.
Okay, so I think the discussion still on the table is, what discriminatory criteria do we want for people to not get explosives permits? I don't know if I have a strong opinion. I mean, other than any other time, I've had a strong opinion for moral reasons, but.
Well, I think one of the things this task force was charged with was removing discriminatory language, and one member has already caught that the wording, at least, of moral turpitude has been used against homosexuals in the past, and so we probably would like to consider other language in that case. I don't know, I would look to council or the city to, maybe the fire marshal to work together to propose appropriate language to replace moral turpitude at a minimum. I think the stability of character comments raised by the fire chief makes sense, and since it's not something that the average person is likely to experience applying for, that I don't think it's onerous for the other requirements, for what it's worth.
I will just register that requiring someone 10 years after treatment is a long time. And so, anyway, just gonna put that out there.
I think you're right. I think it is a very long time. This seems to be the longest discrimination I've seen. I think that to parrot the arguments previously, we have fireworks vendors and one licensee. It doesn't appear that people are knocking down the doors to be explosively licensed.
And if they are, why?
Jared, do you have an opinion on the phrase moral turpitude? Is that a legal term, or is that a term of art that perhaps is antiquated?
Well, both, perhaps.
Okay.
New legal term,
You know,
please.
it does show up in a lot of city codes. I certainly understand the concern about how it's been used in the past historically. I also understand the concern about, you know, the vagueness of it too. So we can, you know, I guess the question is, and maybe this is something staff just needs to revisit, is what kind of going back to the same question we had with crime-free housing, you know, what particular crimes are we really worried about? What are indicative of, you know, the red flags of danger for someone who's licensed? And I don't know if it's, you know, all felonies or a subset of felonies or subset of gross misdemeanors. And then, of course, you know, raise a good point about 10 years for, you know, drug convictions or drug addictions, whether that's, you know, far too long. And so I don't know that we can sit here and solve all this. We may have to regroup at a staff level and come back with a recommendation.
DJ, can you tell me, I assume that it's more than just Burnsville saying you can have explosives to allow people to have explosives, right? Like, they
Yeah,
have to
like
be
I-
state
like I
licensed as
said,
well?
I think ours is somewhat specific, given the quarry, to some extent. And, the fire marshal's office does do some licensing of explosives. So, yeah, I think we're in a bit of a unique situation on this. So, and it's frankly also regulated federally a little bit by ATF and, by the BCA in the state. So there's a lot of moving parts to this. Whether you're talking about the substance, the person, the company, the transportation, all that kind of stuff. So ours is a bit more focused on the use within the city versus the transportation and the education and all that kind of stuff.
I wonder if there is I would imagine there has to be some sort of similar discrimination at the state level where they would say this person is not responsible enough to have a permit to acquire and use explosives, and maybe we could glean something from that.
I was trying to find it after we were done on rental housing, before we got to this topic, and on the state fire marshal's website, I can't find anything like that, but we'll do some more checking, so.
Okay. Well, I'm thinking maybe the consensus is we have the city do some research and get back to us, and, okay. Nancy had a comment about, is the $25 fee correct?
Looks kind of
It
low.
just feels useless.
Obviously, this code has not been
Yeah,
updated
so
in many years
either
because the city
zero
clerk's
or maybe
office has not
250, I don't
issued
know.
this in the
Yeah.
last 20 years
Yeah.
plus, so.
If this is a big commercial permit, I think we could get more out of it.
Or just leave it fee, whatever the fee structure is at the time.
Well, all the fees are in the fee schedule, so
So
if
just
it,
word it to match the
Yes.
fee schedule.
Okay.
All right. That takes us to page 86. And it looks like this is just noted that written or electronic was added from Shelley.
In a bound book.
Can tell you how long ago that was looked at.
Spiral.
I have a lot of those bound books in this building, so.
So if we go to, I guess, recreational burning, then, is the next section. And I'm not seeing any comments other than when we get to fire protection. So anything on recreational burning that we'd like to discuss?
Just plays havoc with my allergies. My neighbor.
Should I come visit and report your neighbors?
Pools and fires, they probably have explosives too. That's,
Probably. Unlicensed, no less. They're probably.
okay, so
probably doing it.
fire protection water supplies. There's a question on 553 inspection. Are inspections of fire hydrants really done annually?
Yes.
Okay,
Are they?
Mine are, my park is.
Okay.
yep, mine are done, I think, twice a year.
So the city, just a point of reference for everybody is, the city flushes the public hydrants twice a year and make sure they're inspected at least once a year. But a little uniqueness to Burnsville is anything that's not on the public right of way. So all of our apartment complexes, our larger commercial, have private water systems, and the property owner actually owns the fire hydrant and the water main underneath it to where it connects to the city. And it's important that those hydrants are exercised at least once a year as well. I can tell you a decade ago, we were having close to a 20% failure rate on our private fire hydrants at our highest risk apartment buildings. So this is a program that we put in the last decade to make sure that those all get done. And the wording down below allows people to opt into a city program or to hire their own, depending on however they want to go about meeting the requirements. But it's definitely improved the reliability of our water system and our fire hydrants.
A clarifying question on that. So I live on a cul-de-sac. There's a fire hydrant in my yard. But I think you said because I'm on the it's on the public right of way, then it's a public fire hydrant and not a private fire hydrant?
That's correct. It's more when you get into bigger properties where the fire hydrant isn't right on the roadway.
Okay.
As soon as you get off the public roadway into private roads or parking lots, things like that, those are all private fire hydrants.
And homeowners aren't assessed for public hydrant repair, right? Other than just generally taxes?
Correct, yeah, and you're just, you pay through your water bill for that to be done, right?
Okay.
It's a standalone service essentially through the city as an enterprise fund. The only other thing I would add to that is it could be a single-family home if it was an association. So we do have some of these that are single-family or twin homes that are private roads. So there are a few of those circumstances as well.
Gotcha. Any other questions on the remaining statutes?
So starting fuels, I saw,
Can you give us a page number?
yep, absolutely, page 88, underneath starter fuels.
Okay.
The last sentence says propane gas torches or other clean burning devices causing minimal pollution must be used to start an open fire. You know, I'm sure we all get what they're trying to say there, but perhaps instead of saying that, just saying devices that cause minimal pollution can be used, or something to that nature. Versus it making it sound like that's how you have to start your fire.
Yeah, I think a may is probably more appropriate than a must
Okay.
there.
Is that a fire drill?
What's that?
We're having technical difficulties.
Great.
No presentation, so
Okay.
it's not necessary.
Taking it away.
Okay. So is that a change then? Okay.
What are we changing?
Must to me.
And I had a related question, and it's back in the recreational fire part, and let's see if I can find the page. Rules adopted by reference. Let's see, it is it's 549. Just be right here. Oh, B, yep. Okay, so it says that it must be ignited with an improved starter fluid. What is an approved starter fluid?
Not your kerosene can.
A can of gasoline.
Okay, I mean,
I think
should
they're
that be clarified?
back to the
Because in my
definition
mind,
of
if it burns, it works.
It seems like the intent is to have not too much smoke. So shouldn't we just say that a method of starting the fire should involve materials that doesn't make too much smoke?
Well, and I would say in addition to smoke, we're also worried about people dumping gasoline and things like that on there. We get a fair amount of people doing things like that.
Okay. Do you think it'd be helpful to clarify? I mean, maybe it's not, but I'll clarify what approved starter fluid is.
Starts the motor.
Chair and members of the
Maybe
task
call
force,
it
I think,
Starter fuel, because we have it defined up in the definition section.
that's right.
Starter fuel is defined.
My apologies.
Just change it to starter fuels instead of starter fluids,
Okay.
and then we'll be talking to
That works.
Perfect.
Done.
All right. Yeah. I have to cite you for that. All right. Well, in record time, we went through a lot, so thanks, everyone. Yes.
Chair, just because you brought this up earlier this evening, bottom of page 86, top of page 87, bomb threats?
Oh, yes, right. Can we eliminate the information on bomb threats, 5310, as superfluous? as it's in state statute. And that's how they said they'd prosecute it. They're not gonna bring a city civil thing. They're gonna send you to jail.
Is that a motion?
If we want one, but I think probably consensus is, I'm hoping strong enough. Not seeing any disagreements.
I'm
Okay,
ambivalent.
okay.
Okay.
Then let's strike bomb threats.
It's covered, so we're good.
All right. So miscellaneous items. The next code review task force meeting will be February 22nd, 5:30 PM. Here in the council chambers, meetings will typically be held on the last Wednesday night of the month. Our homework is to review Title VI police regulations. Staff suggested edits will be emailed to us soon, and comments will be due by February 8th.
Actually,
That seems pretty quick.
I just got those today for my review, and as soon as I'm done with them, they'll go out.
Okay,
So hopefully by tomorrow.
perfect. All right. I think that's it, if there's no other comments, questions. All right, Nancy?
Just noticing it isn't an issue for me, but the next meeting is on Ash Wednesday. If anyone can't be available from 5:30 to 7:30 because of that, but.
February
perhaps not.
22nd, is that Wednesday?
February 22nd.
There is no statutory requirement,
All right.
for that. There is if it's like election day, but not for,
Okay.
not for any holidays.
All right. You just
For
get your
Ash
ashes
Wednesday,
earlier in the
Jared,
day.
I'm not aware of anything.
Those who do that.
If,
I would
if
not
this
fall into that
body
category.
has some preference to change the
No.
schedule due to that, then let's,
I don't.
okay.
It works for me.
Works for me.
It's fine with me.
All right, meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.